The gunshots split the twilight air as Delilah Harper pressed herself against the worn leather seat of the stagecoach, her heart hammering so violently she feared it might burst from her chest. The outlaws had appeared from nowhere on this narrow mountain pass, their faces masked with dirty bandanas, their revolvers glinting in the fading light as they surrounded the coach and demanded every valuable thing the passengers possessed. She watched through the window as the driver and guard raised their hands in surrender, their weapons already confiscated by the 6 men who had orchestrated this attack with terrifying efficiency. It was September of 1881. And Delilah had been traveling from Denver to Cripple Creek, Colorado, where she intended to take up a teaching position at the small schoolhouse that served the mining community. At 23 years old, she had finally saved enough money to make her own way in the world, leaving behind the suffocating expectations of her family in Boston, who had wanted her to marry a banker's son she could barely tolerate. The West had called to her with promises of freedom and possibility. But now, as masked raiders rifled through the baggage and stripped the passengers of their money and jewelry, she wondered if she had made a terrible mistake. The door of the stagecoach flew open, and a tall raider with cold gray eyes visible above his mask gestured roughly with his pistol. "Out! All of you! Now!" Delilah climbed down on trembling legs, followed by the other 2 passengers, an elderly merchant named Mr. Patterson, who wheezed with every breath, and a young married couple who clung to each other with white-knuckled terror. The mountain air was crisp and cool, carrying the scent of pine and the approaching night. They stood in a line as the raiders moved through the coach with practiced efficiency, tearing apart luggage and dumping contents onto the dirt road. "Please," Delilah heard herself saying, "my trunk contains books for the school children. They have no value to you." The gray-eyed raider turned to look at her, and for a moment she saw something flicker in his gaze. Then he laughed, a harsh sound that echoed off the rocky slopes surrounding them. "Books? Lady, we are not in the charity business." He turned to one of his companions. "Take everything, the coach too." "What?" The driver, a grizzled man named Jenks, stepped forward. "You cannot leave us stranded here. It will be full dark in less than an hour, and these mountains are no place to be after nightfall." "Should have thought of that before you chose this route," another raider said, already unhitching the horses. "Consider it a lesson." Delilah's blood ran cold as she realized what they intended. The raiders were taking the horses, the coach, and everything inside it, including all the supplies. Her eyes darted to the coach's lantern, the only source of light they would have once the sun disappeared behind the peaks. As if reading her thoughts, the youngest raider grabbed the lantern from its hook and added it to the pile of stolen goods. "No, please," she called out, moving forward instinctively. "At least leave us the lantern. We need light to find our way." The gray-eyed leader walked toward her, and she forced herself not to step back. He was close enough that she could smell tobacco and sweat, see the cruel amusement in his eyes. "The lantern's worth good money. Besides, you have got the moon." He gestured to the sky where a thin crescent was barely visible through the gathering clouds. "Though I reckon those storm clouds rolling in might hide it before long." Within minutes, the raiders had mounted up, taking the stagecoach horses and 2 pack animals loaded with all the baggage and supplies. The gray-eyed man tipped his hat in a mocking salute before spurring his horse, and the group disappeared around the bend in the road, leaving nothing but dust and hoof prints behind. For a long moment, nobody spoke. They stood on the mountain road as the shadows lengthened and the temperature dropped. The elderly Mr. Patterson was the first to break the silence. "We need to start walking. Cripple Creek cannot be more than 10 or 12 miles from here." 12 miles through mountain terrain in the dark," Jenks said grimly. "Without supplies, without light, without weapons to protect ourselves from whatever we might encounter." He did not need to elaborate. Everyone knew these mountains were home to bears, mountain lions, and other dangers that prowled after sunset. The young husband, whose name was Thomas, put his arm around his wife Sarah. "We have no choice but to try. Staying here will do us no good." They began walking, staying close together as if proximity might provide some protection from the gathering darkness. Delilah kept her eyes on the road ahead, trying not to think about what might be watching from the dense forest that pressed in on both sides. The tall pines and aspens created walls of shadow that seemed to deepen with every passing minute. She had worn her traveling dress of deep blue wool, practical for the journey but hardly designed for hiking through wilderness. Her button-up boots were already pinching her feet, and she could feel a blister forming on her heel. The sky had turned from purple to deep indigo when they heard it, a sound that froze them all in their tracks. It started as a low rumble, then rose to a howl that seemed to come from multiple directions at once. Wolves, a pack of them, somewhere in the darkness surrounding the road. "Keep moving," Jenks urged, his voice tight with fear. "Do not run, but do not stop either." They pressed on, but the howls grew closer, more insistent. Delilah could hear movement in the brush now, the crack of twigs and the rustle of leaves that spoke of large animals circling their position. Her breath came in short gasps, and she found herself praying silently, desperately, to anyone who might be listening. The first wolf emerged from the tree line about 30 yards ahead, its eyes reflecting the last traces of twilight. It was massive, with thick gray fur and shoulders that rippled with muscle. Within seconds, 2 more appeared behind it, cutting off their forward progress. The group bunched together, Mr. Patterson wheezing so hard Delilah feared he might collapse. "Back away slowly," Thomas said, though his voice shook, "toward the trees." "That is where more of them are," Sarah whispered, clutching her husband's arm. They were trapped. Delilah felt the reality of their situation crash over her like a wave of ice water. They were going to die here, torn apart by wolves on a mountain road, all because she had wanted adventure and independence. Her mother had been right to warn her. She should have married that boring banker's son and lived a safe, predictable life in Boston. The lead wolf took a step forward, its lips pulling back to reveal teeth that gleamed white in the darkness. Delilah closed her eyes, unable to watch what was about to happen. That was when she heard the new sound. A sharp whistle, high and piercing, followed by a shout that seemed to come from the rocks above the road. The wolves' heads snapped up, their attention diverted. Another whistle, closer now, and then a shape emerged from the tree line to their right. At first, Delilah thought it was a bear. The figure was enormous, broad-shouldered and towering, moving with a power that seemed barely contained by human form. But as he stepped onto the road between them and the wolves, she realized it was a man unlike any she had ever seen. He stood well over 6 feet tall, with a chest and arms that strained against the buckskin shirt he wore. His hair hung past his shoulders in waves of dark brown, wild and untamed, and his face was all hard angles and weathered skin that spoke of years spent in harsh elements. In his massive hands he carried a rifle that looked almost small against his frame, and a knife with a blade that had to be over a foot long hung from his belt. He did not speak to them. Instead, he focused entirely on the wolves, making a series of sounds that were somewhere between growls and words. The lead wolf held its ground for a moment, and Delilah could have sworn some kind of communication passed between the man and the animal. Then, with a final snarl, the wolf turned and disappeared back into the trees, its pack following close behind. The silence that followed was profound. Delilah realized she had been holding her breath and let it out in a shaky exhale. The mountain man turned to face them, and even in the darkness, she could see his eyes. A striking blue-gray that seemed to capture what little light remained. His gaze swept over the group, assessing, and when it landed on her, she felt a jolt run through her body that had nothing to do with fear. "You folks are a long way from anywhere to be standing around in the dark," he said. His voice was deep and rough, like gravel sliding over stone, but there was no mockery in it. "What happened?" Jenks stepped forward, relief evident in his posture. "Raiders hit our stagecoach about an hour back, took everything, including our horses and lantern. We were trying to make it to Cripple Creek on foot." The mountain man shook his head slowly. "You would not have made it, not through these woods at night, not with that storm coming." As if to punctuate his words, thunder rumbled in the distance. "My cabin is about 2 miles from here, up in the high country. You can shelter there until morning." "We do not want to impose," Mr. Patterson began, but the mountain man cut him off. "It is not an imposition. It is survival. Now, come on before those wolves decide to test whether I was bluffing." He turned and started walking up a path that Delilah had not even noticed in the darkness, a narrow trail that led away from the main road and into the forest. The group exchanged glances, then followed. What choice did they have? They were lost, weaponless, and surrounded by dangers they could not even see. This stranger had just saved their lives. As they walked, The mountain man moved with surprising grace for someone his size, navigating the rocky terrain as easily as if it were broad daylight. He held up one hand occasionally, signaling them to watch their step or warning of obstacles ahead. Delilah found herself studying him as she climbed, fascinated despite herself. Everything about him spoke of raw strength barely contained, the way his muscles bunched and released under his shirt with each movement, the breadth of his back, the powerful legs that carried him up the steep incline without any sign of effort. He wore his hair loose, and it swung with his stride, catching on his shoulders. There was something almost primal about him, as if he belonged to these mountains in a way civilized people never could. They had been climbing for perhaps 20 minutes when the first drops of rain began to fall. Within seconds it became a downpour, cold and relentless. The trail turned to mud beneath their feet, making every step treacherous. Mr. Patterson slipped and would have fallen if Jenks had not caught him. Sarah was crying softly, and Thomas looked close to panic. The mountain man appeared beside Delilah without warning, making her jump. "Give me your hand," he said. She hesitated only a moment before placing her hand in his. His palm was calloused and rough, but his grip was steady and warm, and when he helped her over a particularly difficult section of trail, she felt the coiled strength in his arm. He smelled of wood smoke and leather, and something else she could not quite identify, something wild and masculine that made her pulse quicken in a way she did not entirely understand. "What is your name?" she asked, having to raise her voice over the sound of the rain. "Flynn Kincaid," he said, not looking at her as he guided her around a fallen log. "Most folks just call me Kincaid." "I am Delilah Harper. Thank you for helping us." He glanced at her then, and even in the darkness and rain, she saw something shift in his expression. "You are a long way from home, Delilah Harper." "I am from Boston originally, but I'm going to Cripple Creek to teach school. That was the plan, anyway. Still can. Morning will come, and I will make sure you get to town safely." His hand tightened around hers as they climbed over a rocky outcrop. "All of you." The cabin appeared suddenly through the trees, and Delilah felt a wave of relief so intense it nearly made her stumble. It was larger than she had expected, built of solid logs with a stone chimney and a covered porch that wrapped around the front. Warm light glowed from the windows, and as they approached, she saw it came from a fire burning in a massive stone fireplace inside. Flynn opened the door and ushered them in, and the warmth that greeted them was like a blessing. The interior was a single large room with the fireplace dominating one wall, a sleeping area in one corner with a bed frame built from logs, and a kitchen area with a table and shelves lined with supplies. Furs covered the floor and the bed, and various tools and weapons hung from pegs on the walls. It was sparse but clean, and after the terror of the past hours, it felt like paradise. "There are blankets in that chest," Flynn said, pointing to a large wooden trunk. "Get out of those wet clothes and wrap up. I will make coffee and food." The women changed behind a blanket that Flynn hung across one corner, peeling off their soaked dresses and undergarments with shaking fingers. Delilah found herself in just her chemise and drawers, wrapped in a thick wool blanket that smelled faintly of cedar. When she emerged, Flynn had his back to them, working at the stove. He had removed his wet buckskin shirt, and she found herself staring at the expanse of his back. Broad shoulders carved with muscle, arms thick as tree trunks, and a tapering waist that spoke of pure functional strength. When he turned to hand her a tin cup of coffee, she saw his chest and abdomen were just as impressive, muscles clearly defined beneath bronzed skin, marked with several scars that told stories of a hard life. He had changed into dry trousers but remained shirtless, apparently unconcerned with modesty in his own home. Delilah felt heat rise to her cheeks, and told herself firmly that her reaction was simply due to the warmth of the fire and the shock of the evening's events. Flynn moved around the small space with quiet efficiency, producing cornbread and beans and some kind of dried meat that he explained was elk. They ate gratefully, too exhausted and hungry to make much conversation. Mr. Patterson fell asleep in a chair by the fire almost immediately after eating, and Thomas and Sarah curled up together on a pile of furs in one corner. Jenks took the other chair, his head nodding as sleep claimed him. That left Delilah sitting at the table with Flynn, nursing her second cup of coffee and trying not to stare at him too obviously. In the firelight, his features were striking, a strong jaw covered with several days' worth of dark stubble, high cheekbones, and those unusual blue-gray eyes that seemed to see more than they should. His hair had dried into loose waves that fell past his shoulders, and she found herself wondering what it would feel like to run her fingers through it. The thought shocked her. She had never been the type to indulge in such fantasies, especially not about a man she had just met. But there was something about Flynn Kincaid that bypassed all her usual reserve and propriety. "How long have you lived up here?" she asked, needing to break the silence. "About 5 years," he said, his voice quiet so as not to disturb the others. "Came out from Missouri after the war ended. Did some prospecting, some trapping, some guiding for folks who needed to cross the mountains. Found this spot and decided to stay." "Do you not get lonely?" He looked at her then, really looked at her, and she felt that jolt again, like lightning running through her veins. "Sometimes. But the mountain is honest. It does not lie or pretend to be something it is not. I learned to value that." There was pain in his voice, old but still present, and Delilah recognized it because she carried her own disappointments and hurts. "The war?" she asked gently. His jaw tightened. "That and what came after. I served with the Union, came home to find my family's farm burned, my parents dead from illness while I was gone, and my younger sister married off to a man who wanted the land more than he wanted her. I could not stay after that, needed somewhere clean, somewhere the past could not follow." Without thinking, Delilah reached across the table and placed her hand over his. His hand dwarfed hers, and she could feel the calluses, the strength in his fingers. "I'm sorry. No one should have to carry that kind of loss alone." He stared at their joined hands for a long moment, and when he looked up, something had changed in his eyes. "What about you? What makes a lady from Boston come all the way out here to teach school in a mining town?" She found herself telling him things she had not planned to share, about her family's expectations, about the suffocating life she had been expected to lead, about her love of books and learning, and her desperate need to do something meaningful with her life. He listened without interrupting, and when she finally fell silent, he nodded slowly. "It takes courage to break away from what is expected. Most people do not have that in them. Or they do not have a choice," she said. "Sometimes running away is the only way to survive." "Is that what you are doing? Running away?" She considered that, really considered it. "Maybe at first, but now I think I'm running toward something. I just do not know what yet." The fire crackled, and outside the rain continued to fall. Flynn still had not moved his hand from under hers, and she became acutely aware of the warmth of his skin, the slight roughness of his palm, the way his thumb had started to move in small circles against her wrist. It was such a small gesture, barely noticeable, but it sent heat coursing through her entire body. "You should rest," he said finally, his voice rougher than before. "You have had a long day. Where will you sleep?" "I will keep watch. Make sure the fire stays going and nothing comes sniffing around. You need rest too." He smiled then, just a slight curve of his lips, but it transformed his face. "I'm used to it. Besides, I do not think I could sleep right now, even if I wanted to." She understood what he meant because she felt it too. This strange awareness between them, this pull that defied logic and propriety. She should have been thinking about the attack, about her lost possessions, about how she would start her new job with nothing. Instead, all she could think about was the way Flynn's eyes seemed to trace her features in the firelight, as if he were memorizing every detail. Reluctantly, she withdrew her hand and stood. "Thank you, Flynn, for everything." "You're welcome, Delilah." The way he said her name, slow and deliberate, made her stomach flip. "Sleep well." She made her way to the corner where Flynn had laid out more furs and blankets, creating a nest of sorts. As she settled in, pulling the blankets up to her chin, she watched him move to the window and look out at the storm. He stood there motionless, a silhouette against the darkness, and she thought she had never seen anyone look quite so alone. Sleep should have been impossible after everything that had happened, but exhaustion claimed her quickly. Her last thought before drifting off was of strong hands and blue-gray eyes, and the strange feeling that her life had just changed in ways she could not yet understand. She woke to the smell of coffee and bacon and pale morning light filtering through the windows. For a moment, she was disoriented, unable to remember where she was. Then it all came flooding back, the raid, the wolves, Flynn Kincaid appearing like something out of a legend to save them. Delilah sat up and found Flynn standing at the stove, now wearing a clean shirt that stretched across his broad back and shoulders. The other passengers were stirring as well, groaning and stretching as they emerged from sleep. Through the window, she could see that the storm had passed, leaving the world washed clean and bright. "Morning," Flynn said without turning around. "Food is almost ready. We will eat, then I will take you all down to Cripple Creek." They ate quickly, everyone eager to reach civilization after the ordeal. Flynn packed supplies into a large leather bag, then led them outside. The air was crisp and clean, smelling of wet pine and earth. Birds sang in the trees, and the mountains stretched away in every direction, their peaks still dusted with snow despite it being early autumn. The journey down was easier than the climb up had been, though Delilah's muscles ached with every step. Flynn led them down a different path than the one they had taken the night before, wider and less steep. He walked beside her for most of the journey, pointing out landmarks and explaining the terrain with an easy knowledge that came from years of experience. "See that peak there?" he said, indicating a mountain to the north. "That is Mount Pisgah. Use it as a landmark if you ever need to find your way. And those trees, the ones with the white bark, aspens, they will turn gold in a few weeks and the whole mountainside will look like it is on fire." "You love it here," she said. It was not a question. "I do. It is hard and unforgiving, but it is real. You always know where you stand with the wilderness. Not like people." He looked at her with those penetrating eyes. Not like people. They reached Cripple Creek just before noon. The town was larger than Delilah had expected, with several main streets lined with buildings, saloons, a general store, a blacksmith, a small church, and various other establishments that served the mining community. Men in dusty work clothes moved about their business, and somewhere in the distance she could hear the rhythmic pounding of machinery at one of the mines. Flynn led them straight to the sheriff's office, where they reported the robbery. The sheriff, a weathered man named Tom Brennan, listened to their story with a grim expression. "That sounds like the Mason gang," he said when Jenks finished describing the attack. "They have been hitting stagecoaches all through this region for the past 6 months. Gray-eyed leader, 6 men total, always take everything including the horses?" "That is them," Jenks confirmed. "We have been trying to catch them, but they know these mountains too well. Always disappear before we can track them." Brennan looked at Flynn. "You happen to see anything, Kincaid?" "Just came across these folks after the raid had already happened," Flynn said. "Wolves were closing in, so I took them up to my place." Brennan nodded. "Lucky you were out there. This could have ended a lot worse." He turned to the passengers. "I will send word to Denver about what happened, and the stage company will arrange for transportation. In the meantime, the hotel can probably put you up on credit until you sort things out." The group began to disperse, making arrangements for lodging and sending telegrams to family and employers. Delilah found herself standing outside the sheriff's office with Flynn, suddenly uncertain what to say. In the bright light of day, surrounded by civilization, the events of the previous night seemed almost dreamlike. "I should find the schoolhouse," she said, "introduce myself to whoever is in charge, and explain why I have arrived with nothing but the clothes on my back. That would be Mrs. Henderson. She runs the general store and sits on the school board. I can take you there." They walked together through the town, drawing curious glances from passers-by. Delilah realized how they must look, her still in a rumpled traveling dress that showed signs of the previous night's ordeal, and Flynn towering beside her in his buckskins and with his long hair, clearly more at home in the wilderness than on a street. Mrs. Henderson turned out to be a plump woman in her 50s, with kind eyes and a no-nonsense manner. She listened to Delilah's story with increasing concern, then waved a hand dismissively when Delilah apologized for arriving in such a state. "My dear girl, it is not your fault you were robbed. Those Mason boys have been a plague on this area for too long. The important thing is you are safe, and Flynn here took care of you." She smiled at Flynn with obvious affection. "He is one of the good ones, even if he does prefer mountains to people." Flynn shifted uncomfortably, clearly unused to praise. "I was just doing what anyone would do." "Nonsense. Most men would have stayed by their fire and not ventured out into that storm." Mrs. Henderson turned back to Delilah. "Now, the school is not much to look at, but the children are eager to learn. We have been without a proper teacher for 3 months now since Miss Patterson moved to Denver. The previous teacher was boarding with the Adams family, and I am sure they would be happy to have you. As for clothes and supplies, the general store can extend you credit until your first pay comes through. Relief flooded through Delilah. Thank you. I was worried that showing up like this might cost me the position. Absolutely not. We need you too badly. The children of this town deserve an education, regardless of whether their parents are miners or merchants. Mrs. Henderson pulled out a ledger. Let me make some notes about what you will need, and we can have you properly outfitted by tomorrow. As Mrs. Henderson wrote, Delilah found herself acutely aware of Flynn standing beside her. She could feel the heat radiating from his body, smell the scent of leather and wood smoke that seemed to cling to him. When she glanced up, she found him watching her with an expression she could not quite read. After making arrangements with Mrs. Henderson, Flynn walked her to the Adams residence, a neat house on the edge of town with a small garden out front. Mrs. Adams, a young woman with a baby on her hip and a toddler clinging to her skirts, welcomed Delilah warmly and showed her to a small room at the back of the house. It is not much, Mrs. Adams said apologetically, but it is clean and quiet. It is perfect, Delilah assured her, meaning it. After sleeping on a mountain floor the night before, the narrow bed with its quilt and the small dresser seemed like luxury. When she came back outside, Flynn was standing in the street looking uncertain for the first time since she had met him. Delilah walked up to him, very aware that this was probably goodbye. He would return to his mountain cabin, and she would begin her new life here in town. Their paths had crossed for one extraordinary night, and now they would diverge. I do not know how to thank you properly, she said. You saved our lives. No thanks needed. I'm glad I found you when I did. He hesitated, then added, The school is on 2nd Street, right near the church. If you need anything, word travels fast in a town this size. Someone can always get a message to me. You do not come to town often? Not if I can help it, but I do come down for supplies every week or so. Might see you around. He was already backing away, and Delilah felt a sudden desperate need to keep him there, to find some reason to extend this conversation. Flynn, wait, she faltered, not sure what she wanted to say. Thank you, not just for last night, but for listening, for understanding. Something flickered in his eyes, something warm and intense that made her breath catch. You take care of yourself, Delilah Harper. This town can be rough, even for someone as brave as you. Then he turned and strode away, his long legs carrying him quickly down the street and toward the edge of town. Delilah watched until he disappeared from view, feeling an odd emptiness settle in her chest. The next few days passed in a blur of activity. Mrs. Henderson outfitted her with 3 serviceable dresses, undergarments, a warm coat, and sturdy boots. The school board met with her and approved her teaching plans. She visited the schoolhouse, a simple one-room building with desks for about 30 children, a blackboard, and a small stove for heat. It was exactly what she had imagined, exactly what she had wanted. She threw herself into preparations for the school year, which was set to begin the following Monday. She organized books, planned lessons, and met with parents who brought their children to introduce themselves. The children ranged in age from 6 to 14, with varying levels of education. Some could barely read, while others were surprisingly advanced. She would have her work cut out for her, but the challenge excited rather than intimidated her. Yet despite the busyness of her days, Delilah found her thoughts returning constantly to Flynn Kincaid. She would be in the middle of arranging books and suddenly remember the way his hand had felt over hers, warm and strong. She would be eating dinner with the Adams family and find herself thinking about his voice, rough and deep, speaking her name in the firelight. She told herself she was being foolish, that she had only known the man for one night, that he had shown no indication of wanting anything more than to help her reach safety. But she could not stop herself from looking for him whenever she walked through town, hoping to catch a glimpse of his broad-shouldered form. She asked Mrs. Adams about him in what she hoped was a casual tone. Flynn Kincaid? Oh, he is quite the local character, Mrs. Adams said, bouncing her baby on her knee. Keeps to himself mostly, but he is always willing to help if someone needs it. Last winter, when the Richardson family got snowed in and ran out of food, Flynn brought down an elk he had hunted, and enough firewood to last them 2 weeks. Would not take any payment either. Said the mountain provides. He seems like a good man. He is. Haunted, though. You can see it in his eyes. Something happened to him back east, though he never talks about it. Been up on that mountain alone for 5 years now. Some of the ladies in town have tried to interest him in settling down, but he never bites. I think he prefers the solitude." Delilah felt her heart sink at that. Of course, Flynn would not be interested in romantic entanglements. He had made his choice to live alone in the wilderness, and one night of sheltering stranded travelers would not change that. Monday arrived, and with it, the first day of school. Delilah stood in front of her students, looking at their eager faces, and felt a surge of purpose and joy. This was why she had come west. This was what mattered. The days fell into a routine. She taught from 8 in the morning until 3 in the afternoon, then spent her evenings preparing lessons and grading assignments. She took her meals with the Adams family and helped Mrs. Adams with the children in exchange for her room. On Sundays, she attended church services and gradually became part of the community. The people of Cripple Creek were welcoming, if rough around the edges, and she found herself growing fond of the little mining town. 2 weeks after her arrival, she was walking back from the general store with supplies for her classroom when she heard a familiar voice behind her. Miss Harper. She spun around, her heart leaping. Flynn stood there in the middle of the street, somehow looking even larger than she remembered. He wore the same buckskin clothing, his hair pulled back in a leather tie at the base of his neck, and he carried a large pack over one shoulder. But what caught her attention were his eyes. They were fixed on her with an intensity that made heat rush through her body. "Flynn," she managed, painfully aware of how breathless she sounded. "I did not know you were in town." "Just arrived. Needed to trade some furs and pick up supplies." He moved closer. She caught that scent of wood smoke and leather again. "How are you settling in?" "Very well. The children are wonderful, and the town has been welcoming." She gestured to the building behind them. "The school is right there, actually. Would you like to see it?" She had not planned to ask, but the words came out before she could stop them. To her surprise and delight, Flynn nodded. "I would like that." She led him into the schoolhouse, suddenly nervous about what he might think. It was simple and plain, but she had tried to make it warm and inviting. Children's drawings hung on the walls, and she had arranged wildflowers in a jar on her desk. Books were stacked neatly on shelves, and the blackboard showed remnants of that day's arithmetic lesson. Flynn walked slowly around the room, taking it all in. His fingers traced over the desks, and he picked up one of the primers she used with the younger children. "I remember learning to read from a book like this," he said quietly. "My mother taught me before the war. She said education was the one thing nobody could take from you." She was right. It is why I wanted to teach. Every child deserves that gift. He set the book down carefully and turned to face her. They were alone in the small building, and suddenly the space seemed very intimate. Outside, she could hear the normal sounds of town life, but in here, it felt like they were the only two people in the world. "I have been thinking about you," Flynn said abruptly. "Probably more than I should. I keep telling myself to stay up on my mountain and mind my own business, but then I find myself making excuses to come to town." Delilah's mouth went dry. "I have been thinking about you too," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. He took a step toward her, then another, until he was close enough that she had to tilt her head back to maintain eye contact. This close, she could see the individual strands of brown and gold in his hair, the small scar above his left eyebrow, the way his chest rose and fell with his breathing. "I am not good at this," he said roughly. "I have been alone for so long, I do not know how to be around people anymore. But there is something about you, Delilah. From the moment I saw you standing on that road with wolves closing in, trying to be brave even though you were terrified, I felt something shift inside me. And when we sat by the fire and you told me about your life, I thought maybe I was not as broken as I believed." Her eyes stung with sudden tears. "You are not broken, Flynn. You are one of the strongest, most capable men I have ever met. Physical strength is easy. It is the rest that is hard." His hand came up, hesitating just inches from her face, as if he was afraid to touch her. "I do not know how to do this. I do not know if I can be what you need." Delilah made the decision for him. She closed the distance between them and took his hand, pressing it against her cheek. His palm was warm and rough, and she turned her face into it, breathing him in. "I do not need you to be anything other than who you are," she said. "I came out here to escape people's expectations, remember? I do not want to put expectations on you either. I just know that when I am near you, I feel something I have never felt before." like I am exactly where I am supposed to be." Flynn made a sound that was half groan, half sigh, and then his arms were around her, pulling her against his chest. She fit against him perfectly despite their size difference, her head tucked under his chin, her hands splayed across his back. She could feel the powerful muscles there, the heat of his body, the rapid beating of his heart. "I should not do this," he murmured into her hair. "You deserve someone better, someone who can give you a normal life." "I do not want normal," she said fiercely, pulling back to look at him. "I want real. I want honest. I want someone who understands what it is like to need to escape the past and build something new." He searched her face, and whatever he saw there must have convinced him, because his expression changed. His hand slid from her cheek into her hair, cradling the back of her head, and then he was lowering his mouth to hers. The kiss was gentle at first, almost tentative, as if Flynn was afraid of his own strength, but when Delilah pressed closer and parted her lips beneath his, something seemed to break loose inside him. The kiss deepened, becoming hungry and desperate. His other arm wrapped around her waist, lifting her onto her toes, and she wound her arms around his neck, lost in sensation. She had been kissed before, chaste kisses from proper Boston gentlemen who kept their passion carefully controlled. This was nothing like that. This was raw and intense, a claiming and a surrender all at once. She could feel the barely leashed power in Flynn's body, the way his muscles trembled with restraint, and it made her feel powerful and feminine and desired in a way she never had before. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Flynn rested his forehead against hers. "I should probably go," he said, but he made no move to release her. "You probably should," she agreed, but she tightened her grip on his shoulders. They stood there for a long moment, neither willing to let go. Finally, Flynn pulled back with what looked like immense effort. "Can I see you again? I mean, properly, not just running into each other in town." "I would like that very much. Sunday. I will come to town Sunday morning, and we can spend the day together, if you want." "I want," she said simply. He nodded, looking relieved and nervous all at once. It was endearing to see this massive, capable man unsure of himself, and it made her care for him even more. "Sunday, then," he said, backing toward the door. "I will meet you here at the school." 10 o'clock? 10 o'clock, she confirmed. He left, and Delilah sank into her desk chair, pressing her fingers to her still tingling lips. She felt like laughing and crying at the same time. This was madness. She barely knew Flynn Kincaid, and what she did know suggested that he was not a man suited for any kind of normal courtship or relationship. He was wild and solitary, more comfortable with mountains than people. But she did not care. For the first time in her life, she felt truly alive, and she was not going to let that go without fighting for it. Sunday arrived with agonizing slowness. Delilah agonized over what to wear, finally settling on her best dress, a deep green wool with black trim. She braided her brown hair and pinned it up, then added her one piece of jewelry that the raiders had not taken, a simple gold locket that had belonged to her grandmother. Flynn was waiting outside the school when she arrived, and her breath caught at the sight of him. He had clearly made an effort as well, wearing clean trousers and a shirt of deep blue cotton that matched his eyes. His hair was still loose but looked freshly washed, falling in dark waves to his shoulders. He held a bouquet of wildflowers in his hand, looking decidedly uncomfortable. "I did not know if ladies out here expected flowers," he said gruffly, thrusting them toward her, "but my mother always said it was proper." "They are beautiful," Delilah said, taking them and breathing in their sweet scent. "Thank you, Flynn." They walked together through the town, which was quiet on the Sunday morning. Most folks were either at church or sleeping off Saturday nights drinking. Flynn led her past the edge of town to a trail she had not noticed before. "There's a place I want to show you," he said, "if you do not mind a bit of a walk. Lead the way." They hiked for about 30 minutes, climbing gradually into the foothills. Flynn matched his pace to hers, pointing out plants and animals as they went. He showed her which berries were safe to eat and which would make her sick, how to read animal tracks in the soft earth, and how to listen for the warning calls of birds that indicated predators nearby. His knowledge was vast and clearly hard-won through years of experience. Finally, they emerged into a small meadow that took Delilah's breath away. It was surrounded by aspen trees that were just beginning to turn gold, and a small stream ran through the center, its water clear and cold. Wildflowers dotted the grass in splashes of purple and yellow. and the view stretched away to show the mountains rising in every direction. "Oh, Flynn," she breathed. "It is beautiful." "I thought you might like it. I come here sometimes when town gets to be too much." He spread out a blanket he had been carrying and gestured for her to sit. "I brought food. Nothing fancy, just bread and cheese and some apples, but I thought we might picnic." They sat together on the blanket, eating and talking. Flynn told her more about his life before the war, about growing up on a farm in Missouri and learning to hunt and track from his father. She told him about Boston, about the strictures of society there, and her growing realization that she would suffocate if she stayed. "I always felt like I was playing a role," she said, lying back on the blanket to stare up at the impossibly blue sky. "Like the real me was hidden away somewhere, and I was showing everyone this perfect, proper version that was not actually true." Flynn lay down beside her, close enough that their shoulders touched. "And now? Now I feel like maybe I can figure out who I really am, without anyone telling me who I should be." "I know what you mean. After the war, I tried to fit back into civilian life, tried to be the man I had been before. But too much had changed. I had changed. Coming out here let me start over, be someone new." She turned her head to look at him. "Do you ever regret it? Choosing this solitary life?" He was quiet for a long moment. "I did not until recently. But lately, I've been wondering what it would be like to have someone to share it with, someone who understood." Her heart swelled. "I think I understand. Not everything, maybe. But enough to know that what you have built here is special. You are not running away anymore, Flynn. You are living on your own terms. That takes courage." He rolled onto his side, propping himself up on one elbow to look down at her. "You have courage, too. Coming all the way out here alone, starting a new life with nothing. I admire that." "I was terrified," she admitted. "I still am sometimes. What if I fail? What if the children do not learn, or the town decides I'm not good enough? Then you will pick yourself up and try again. That is what brave people do. They are not unafraid. They are just determined to keep going despite the fear." His face was very close to hers now, and Delilah could see the flecks of gray in his blue eyes, the thick lashes that any woman would envy. She reached up and touched his face, running her fingers along his jawline and feeling the scratch of stubble against her palm. "I am glad the raiders took our lantern," she said softly. "Is that terrible to say?" "Why?" "Because if they had not, you would not have found us in the dark, and I would never have met you." Flynn closed his eyes briefly, as if her words pained him. When he opened them again, they burned with intensity. "I have been trying to stay away from you, telling myself that I have nothing to offer someone like you. But I cannot stop thinking about you, Delilah. You have gotten into my head, into my heart, and I do not know what to do about it." "You could try kissing me again," she suggested, feeling bold. "That seemed to work well last time." He huffed a laugh, but then his expression grew serious. "If I kiss you now, I am not sure I will be able to stop. And I want to do this right. You deserve to be courted properly." "Flynn Kincaid, are you asking to court me?" "I am, if you will have me. I know I am not much of a catch. I live alone in a cabin in the mountains. I have very little money, and I am not good with people. But I promise you, if you give me a chance, I will do everything in my power to make you happy." Delilah felt tears prick her eyes. "You already make me happy, and I do not care about money or status or any of that. I left all that behind in Boston. What I care about is finding someone who sees me for who I really am and still wants to know more, someone who makes me feel alive." "You do that for me too," he said roughly. "I feel like I have been asleep for 5 years and you woke me up." She pulled him down to her, and this time the kiss was slow and thorough, a promise and a beginning. When they finally pulled apart, they were both flushed and breathing hard. They spent the rest of the afternoon in that meadow, talking and kissing and simply being together. Flynn told her about his plans to expand his cabin, maybe add a second room. Delilah talked about her students, about which ones were struggling and which were excelling. They discussed books they had read, places they hoped to see someday, dreams they had kept secret from everyone else. As the sun began to sink toward the western peaks, Flynn reluctantly said they should head back. He walked her all the way to the Adams house, holding her hand the entire way despite the curious looks from townspeople. At the door, he kissed her once more, gently, reverently. "Can I see you next Sunday?" he asked. "What about before then? You could come to town during the week." He shook his head regretfully. "I have traps set that need checking, and winter is coming. I need to prepare. But I promise, every Sunday I will be here. And if you need me before then, for any reason, send word." "I will. Be safe, Flynn." "You too, and Delilah. Thank you for taking a chance on me." "Thank you for finding me in the dark," she replied. The next weeks fell into a pattern. Delilah taught during the week, throwing herself into her work with passion and dedication. Flynn came to town every Sunday without fail, and they spent the day together exploring the mountains, talking and growing closer. He brought her small gifts, a perfectly shaped stone from a creek bed, a hawk feather, wildflowers that he said reminded him of her. The people of Cripple Creek began to notice, of course. Mrs. Henderson commented approvingly that it was about time Flynn had someone in his life. Mrs. Adams teased Delilah gently about her mysterious Sunday disappearances. And a few of the more protective townsmen had quiet words with Flynn, making it clear that if he hurt their teacher, he would have to answer to them. Flynn took it all in stride, his respect for Delilah evident in every word and action. October arrived, bringing cooler temperatures and the aspens turning to gold, just as Flynn had predicted. One Sunday, he brought Delilah to his cabin for the first time since that stormy night. In the daylight, she could see it properly, solid and well-built, with a garden plot beside it where he had grown vegetables over the summer. Inside, everything was neat and organized, and she could see the care he had taken with his home. It is wonderful," she said, running her hand over the smooth log walls. "You built this yourself?" "With some help from folks in town for the heavy lifting, but mostly, yes. Took me the better part of a year." He watched her nervously as she explored. "I know it is not much compared to what you are probably used to. It is perfect. It is honest and real, just like you." She turned to face him. "Flynn, can I ask you something?" "Anything. Where do you see this going? Between us, I mean." He crossed to her in 2 long strides, taking her hands in his. "I see it going as far as you will let it. I know I should probably wait longer, court you properly for a year like folks expect. But I am not a patient man, Delilah, and I do not see the point in pretending I do not know what I want." "What do you want?" "You. Here with me, as my wife, if you will have me." Her breath caught. They had only been courting for a few weeks, and by all conventional standards, this was far too fast. But Delilah found that she did not care about conventional standards. She had learned that night on the dark mountain road that life was too short and too unpredictable to waste time on shoulds and ought-tos. "Yes," she said simply. Flynn's face transformed with joy, and he picked her up, spinning her around as she laughed. When he set her down, he cupped her face in his large hands and kissed her with a tenderness that made her eyes sting with tears. "I will build us a bigger cabin," he said. "Add more rooms, and you can keep teaching if you want. I know that's important to you." "I do want to keep teaching, but I also want this, Flynn. A life with you, up here away from everything. I want to wake up next to you every morning and fall asleep in your arms every night. I want to build something real and lasting." They spent the rest of that day making plans. Flynn said he would need about a month to finish the cabin expansion and prepare for winter. They would marry in November, before the heavy snows came. It would be a simple ceremony, just a few people from town and the minister, but that was all they needed. When Flynn brought Delilah back to town that evening, they stopped at the Adams house first to share the news. Mrs. Adams squealed with delight and hugged them both. Mr. Adams shook Flynn's hand firmly and welcomed him to the family, as if Delilah had been their daughter rather than a boarder. The next few weeks were a whirlwind. Word of the engagement spread quickly through Cripple Creek, and the response was overwhelmingly positive. The women of the town rallied around Delilah, helping her plan the modest wedding and put together a trousseau of sorts. Mrs. Henderson donated fabric for a wedding dress, and several ladies gathered to help Delilah sew it. Flynn came to town twice a week now, working on the cabin and making preparations. On the days he could not come, he sent notes with trappers and traders who passed by his place, simple messages that made Delilah's heart flutter. "Thinking of you. Cannot wait until you are home with me. F." The date was set for November 15th. Delilah taught her students through the first week of November, then announced that she would be taking a brief hiatus to get married. The children were thrilled, and the older ones teased her mercilessly about Flynn. The night before the wedding, Delilah lay awake in her small room at the Adams house, thinking about how much her life had changed in just a few short months. She had come west seeking independence and purpose, and she had found those things. But she had also found something she had not expected: love. Real and deep and consuming. The wedding day dawned clear and cold. Delilah dressed in her simple white gown, which Mrs. Adams had trimmed with lace, borrowed from her own wedding dress. She wore her hair down at Flynn's request, flowing over her shoulders in soft waves. Looking at herself in the small mirror, she barely recognized the woman staring back. Gone was the prim Boston lady with her carefully arranged hair and tightly laced corset. In her place was someone softer, freer, with color in her cheeks and light in her eyes. The ceremony took place at the small church on 2nd Street. Flynn stood at the altar in his best clothes, which still could not fully contain his broad shoulders and muscular frame. His hair was neatly tied back, and his face was clean-shaven for once, revealing the strong lines of his jaw. When Delilah walked down the aisle, his eyes locked on hers, and the love she saw there nearly buckled her knees. The service was brief. They spoke their vows in clear, steady voices, promising to love and cherish each other through whatever might come. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Flynn kissed her with such tender passion that several of the ladies in attendance sighed audibly. The reception was held at the hotel, with food and drink provided by nearly everyone in town. People toasted the happy couple, and Flynn made an awkward but heartfelt speech about how Delilah had changed his life. Then they danced, Flynn moving with surprising grace despite his size, holding Delilah as if she were made of spun glass. As the sun began to set, they said their goodbyes and climbed onto Flynn's horse. He sat behind her, one arm wrapped securely around her waist, and they rode up into the mountains toward their new home. The cabin looked warm and welcoming in the twilight, smoke rising from the chimney. Flynn had spent the morning there before the wedding, building up the fire and making everything ready. Now he dismounted and lifted Delilah down, then surprised her by sweeping her into his arms and carrying her across the threshold. Inside, everything was transformed. Flynn had added a bedroom, separated from the main room by a solid wall and door, giving them privacy. The bed was larger than the one he had been using, piled with furs and quilts. Fresh curtains hung at the windows, and the table held a vase of late-season wildflowers. "Oh, Flynn," Delilah breathed, "you did all this. I wanted it to be right for you. For us." He set her gently on her feet, and she saw nervousness in his eyes. "I know the wedding night is supposed to be a certain way, but I want you to know there is no rush. We have all the time in the world." She stepped close to him, reaching up to untie the leather thong holding his hair back. It fell loose around his shoulders, and she ran her fingers through it, marveling at the softness. "I'm not nervous, Flynn. I want this. I want you." He groaned and pulled her against him, his mouth finding hers in a kiss that held none of the restraint he had shown before. His hands moved over her body, learning her shape through the fabric of her dress, and she pressed closer, wanting to feel all of him. They undressed each other slowly, reverently, by firelight. Delilah traced the scars on Flynn's chest and arms, each one a story of survival and strength. He worshipped her body with his hands and mouth, making her feel beautiful and desired in ways she had never imagined. When they finally came together, it was with a rightness that transcended the physical, a joining of souls as much as bodies. Afterward, they lay tangled together in the big bed, Delilah's head on Flynn's chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. His fingers traced lazy patterns on her bare back, and she had never felt so content, so completely at peace. "I love you," he said quietly. "I do not think I have said that enough, but I do, Delilah, more than I knew it was possible to love someone." "I love you too. You are my light in the darkness, Flynn. You always will be." They fell asleep wrapped in each other's arms, the fire burning low, the mountains standing guard around their little cabin. The winter that followed was harsh, with heavy snows that sometimes kept them trapped in the cabin for days at a time. But Delilah found she did not mind. She had brought her books and spent the long evenings reading aloud to Flynn while he worked on various projects, carving furniture, mending tools, crafting gifts for the coming spring. They talked endlessly, learning everything there was to know about each other, building the foundation of their life together. Flynn taught her to shoot and to track, to read the weather and understand the rhythms of the mountain. She taught him to see the poetry in the world around them, reading him verses from her favorite books and showing him how stories could capture truth in ways plain facts could not. They made love often, learning each other's bodies and desires, growing more comfortable and adventurous as the weeks passed. Flynn was always gentle despite his great strength, and his tenderness with her was a constant source of wonder. Spring arrived slowly, the snow melting to reveal the earth beneath. Delilah discovered she was pregnant in April, and Flynn's reaction was everything she could have hoped for. He held her close and wept with joy, then immediately began planning for the child's arrival. He expanded the cabin again, adding another room that would serve as a nursery. He built a cradle from smooth pine, sanding it until there was not a single rough edge that might harm tender skin. And he became even more protective of Delilah, fussing over her in ways that she found both touching and occasionally exasperating. "Flynn, I am pregnant, not an invalid," she protested one day when he tried to carry her up a gentle slope she had climbed dozens of times before. "I can still walk." "I know, but I like taking care of you." He nuzzled her neck, his stubble tickling her skin. "Humor me." How could she refuse? In May, Delilah returned to teaching, riding down to Cripple Creek twice a week to hold classes. The students were delighted to see her, and she found she had missed them. Flynn always accompanied her on these trips, waiting patiently while she taught, then escorting her safely home. The townspeople had grown accustomed to seeing them together, and there was much speculation about when the baby would arrive. The summer passed in a golden haze. Delilah's belly grew round with their child, and Flynn would spend hours with his hand resting on the swell, feeling the baby kick and move. They talked about names, about what kind of parents they wanted to be, about the future they were building. In September, exactly 1 year after the night they had met, Delilah went into labor. Flynn had arranged for the doctor from Cripple Creek to be on call, and he rode down the mountain at breakneck speed to fetch him. The labor was long and difficult, and there were moments when Flynn feared he might lose her. He paced outside the bedroom like a caged animal, praying to any god that might be listening to keep his wife safe. Finally, as dawn broke over the mountains, a baby's cry split the air. The doctor emerged, smiling wearily. "You have a son. Mother and baby are both doing well." Flynn rushed into the room and found Delilah propped up in bed, exhausted but glowing, holding a tiny bundle wrapped in soft flannel. She looked up at him with tears streaming down her face. "Flynn, meet your son. Our son." He approached slowly, almost afraid to touch something so small and fragile. But when Delilah placed the baby in his massive hands, he felt something shift in his chest, a love so overwhelming it nearly brought him to his knees. The baby was perfect, with a shock of dark hair and eyes that would probably turn the same blue-gray as his father's. "What should we name him?" Delilah asked. Flynn thought for a moment. "James, after my father. James Flynn Kincaid." "James," Delilah repeated, smiling. "It is perfect." The baby thrived, growing strong and healthy. Flynn proved to be a devoted father, rocking James through the night when he fussed, carrying him in a sling across his chest while he did chores, singing old songs his mother had taught him in a surprisingly sweet voice. Delilah returned to teaching part-time once James was a few months old, bringing him with her to school. The children adored him, treating him like a beloved pet, and he seemed content to sleep or play while his mother worked. The years passed, marked by the changing seasons and the milestones of their lives. James grew into a sturdy boy with his father's build and his mother's curious mind. When he was 3, Delilah became pregnant again, and this time gave birth to a daughter they named Lily Rose. 2 years after that came another son, Samuel. Flynn expanded the cabin twice more, creating a home that was spacious and comfortable while still maintaining the rustic charm that had drawn Delilah to it in the first place. He built a larger porch where they would sit in the evenings, watching the sunset over the peaks while the children played at their feet. Delilah continued teaching, though she cut back her hours as her family grew. She found she loved being a mother as much as she loved teaching, and the two roles complemented each other beautifully. Her children grew up wild and free, learning to read and write and cipher at their mother's knee, learning to hunt and track and survive from their father. The Mason gang that had robbed the Stagecoach so many years ago was eventually caught and brought to justice. The trial was held in Denver, and Flynn and Delilah made the trip to testify. It was strange to see the gray-eyed leader, whose name turned out to be Robert Mason, sitting in chains. He looked smaller than Delilah remembered, diminished by captivity. When she took the stand and recounted the events of that night, she found she bore him no ill will. Yes, he and his men had robbed her, had left her and the others stranded in the darkness, but without that terrifying night, she never would have met Flynn. Her life would have taken a completely different path. As they left the courthouse, Flynn took her hand. "What are you thinking about?" "About how strange life is. How one terrible moment can lead to something beautiful." He squeezed her hand. "I think about that too. About how lucky I was to be out checking my traps that night, to hear those wolves, to find you standing there trying to be brave. I was not very brave. You were, you are. Bravest woman I know." They returned to Cripple Creek and their life in the mountains. The children grew, and eventually their cabin became too small, even with all the expansions. Flynn built them a proper house, 2 stories with glass windows and a real kitchen. But they kept the original cabin as well, using it as a workshop and sometimes sleeping there when they wanted to remember the early days of their marriage. James grew into a young man who was the image of his father, tall and broad-shouldered, with the same quiet strength and affinity for the wilderness. He became a guide like Flynn, leading prospectors and tourists through the mountains. Lily Rose inherited her mother's love of learning and became a teacher herself, eventually taking over the Cripple Creek School when Delilah retired. Samuel was the adventurous one, heading further west to try his hand at mining and trading. Flynn's hair turned gray, though he remained strong and vital well into his 60s. Delilah developed laugh lines around her eyes and a few streaks of silver in her brown hair. They grew old together, surrounded by their children and eventually their grandchildren, building a legacy of love and strength. On their 40th wedding anniversary, Flynn took Delilah to the meadow where he had proposed. It was autumn again, and the aspens blazed gold against the blue sky, just as they had all those years ago. They spread a blanket and sat together, her head on his shoulder, his arm around her waist. "Do you ever regret it?" he asked. "Choosing this life? You could have had so much more in Boston." She turned to look at him, at his weathered face and still vibrant eyes, and smiled. "I have everything I could possibly want. You gave me a life of purpose and passion, Flynn. You showed me what it means to be truly free. I would not change a single moment. Not even the part where you were robbed and nearly killed by wolves?" She laughed. "Not even that, because it brought me to you." He kissed her then, as tenderly as he had on their wedding day, and she felt the same flutter in her heart that she had felt when he first touched her in the firelight of his cabin. "You are still my light," he murmured against her lips. "My beacon in the darkness. You always will be." "And you are mine," she replied. They sat together in the meadow as the sun traced its arc across the sky, 2 people who had found each other against all odds and built a life that was extraordinary in its ordinariness. They had faced challenges and hardships, had weathered storms, both literal and metaphorical, but they had done it together, and that had made all the difference. As twilight gathered and the first stars appeared, Flynn helped Delilah to her feet and they walked hand in hand back toward their home. Smoke rose from the chimney, promising warmth and light, and through the windows they could see their grandchildren playing inside. It was a scene of perfect domestic contentment, the kind of life neither of them had ever imagined they could have. But they had built it together, starting from that terrifying night on a dark mountain road when raiders had taken a stagecoach's only lantern and a mountain man had become her light through the dark woods. Everything that had come after, all the love and joy and family, had grown from that single moment of connection. They climbed the steps to their porch and paused to look back at the mountains, dark shapes against the deepening sky. Somewhere up there was the cabin where they had first made love, where James had been born, where they had learned what it meant to be husband and wife. It still stood, solid and enduring, a testament to what they had created. I love you, Delilah Kincaid, Flynn said, as he had said countless times over the past 40 years. I love you too, Flynn Kincaid, she replied, as she would continue to say for all the years they had left. Then they went inside together, closing the door on the darkness, safe in the light they had built together and the love that would never fade. Their story had begun with loss and fear, with raiders and darkness and the unknown. But it had become something beautiful, a tale of love and courage, of two people who had found each other when they needed it most and had built a life that was worth every struggle and sacrifice. They had raised children who were strong and kind, who knew the value of hard work and the importance of compassion. They had created a home filled with laughter and learning, with warmth and security. And on quiet nights, when the grandchildren were asleep and the fire burned low, Flynn and Delilah would sit together and remember that stormy September night when everything had changed. They would think about the wolves circling in the darkness, about the fear and uncertainty, about the moment when Flynn had stepped onto that road and their eyes had first met. Do you think the raiders ever realized what they did? Delilah asked one such night. How taking that lantern changed both our lives? Flynn considered that. Probably not. They were just looking for things they could sell. They had no idea they were setting in motion something that would affect so many people. Strange how that works, how small actions can have such enormous consequences. Not strange, just life. Every choice we make ripples outward, touching people we will never meet in ways we cannot predict. He pulled her closer. I am grateful they took that lantern. I am grateful for every twist of fate that brought you to me. And I am grateful for the darkness, Delilah said, because it showed me that light comes in forms we do not always expect. Sometimes it is a lantern, sometimes it is the moon and stars, and sometimes it is a man with a kind heart who is willing to guide strangers through the wilderness. They fell silent, content simply to be together. Two souls who had found their home in each other. Outside, the mountains kept their eternal watch, and somewhere in the darkness, new stories were beginning. New lives were intersecting, new lights were being kindled. But inside this house, the story was complete. It was a story of love conquering fear, of two broken people finding wholeness together, of a teacher from Boston and a mountain man from Missouri who had built something lasting and true. And as Flynn and Delilah Kincaid drifted off to sleep that night, surrounded by the evidence of the life they had created, they knew with absolute certainty that they had been blessed beyond measure. The raiders might have taken the Stagecoach's only lantern all those years ago, but in doing so, they had inadvertently given Flynn and Delilah the greatest gift imaginable, each other. Their love had been the light that guided them through every dark moment that followed, and it would continue to burn bright until the very end of their days. It was a light that would be passed down to their children and grandchildren, illuminating future generations and reminding them that even in the darkest night, even when all seems lost, there is always hope. There is always the possibility of finding someone who will be your light, your guide, your home. And that ultimately was the true legacy of Delilah Harper and Flynn Kincaid. Not the house they built or the land they worked, but the love they shared and the example they set. They had shown everyone who knew them what it meant to be brave enough to reach for happiness, strong enough to build a life from nothing, and wise enough to cherish every moment along the way. The years continued to pass gently for Flynn and Delilah. Their children brought them more grandchildren, and eventually great-grandchildren filled the house with noise and laughter. James married a local girl named Elizabeth, and they built their own cabin just over the ridge, close enough to help, but far enough to have their independence. Lily Rose married her childhood sweetheart and continued teaching, instilling in a new generation of children the same love of learning her mother had shown her. Samuel eventually returned from his adventures out west with a wife, and tales of gold strikes and narrow escapes that kept the grandchildren enthralled for hours. Flynn remained active well into his 70s, still trapping and hunting, though he no longer went as deep into the wilderness as he once had. His body bore the marks of a life lived hard and honestly, old scars from bear encounters and accidents, joints that ached in cold weather, hands gnarled from decades of physical labor. But his eyes remained clear and sharp, and his love for Delilah burned as bright as ever. Delilah, now in her early 70s, had retired from teaching years ago, but remained involved with the school, often visiting to read to the children or help with particularly difficult students. Her hair was silver now, worn in a simple bun, and her face showed the lines of a life filled with laughter and love. She had written down her story, the story of how she and Flynn had met, and it had become something of a legend in Cripple Creek. Young couples would ask her to tell it at their weddings, seeing it as a good omen for their own marriages. The town itself had changed over the decades. The mining boom had eventually busted, and many people had moved on to new opportunities elsewhere. But a core community remained, people who loved the mountains and the freedom they offered. New businesses had opened, the church had been rebuilt after a fire, and modern conveniences like telegraph lines and better roads had connected Cripple Creek more firmly to the rest of Colorado. But the mountains themselves remained timeless and unchanging, providing the same beauty and challenge they always had. One autumn evening, as Flynn and Delilah sat on their porch watching the sunset paint the peaks in shades of pink and gold, Delilah turned to her husband with a soft smile. "Do you remember what you said to me that first night? In your cabin after you saved us?" Flynn thought for a moment. "I said a lot of things that night. You said the mountain was honest, that it did not lie or pretend to be something it was not. You said you had learned to value that. I remember. It is still true. You are like that too, you know, honest and true. You have never pretended to be anything other than exactly who you are. That is one of the things I love most about you." He reached over and took her hand, their fingers intertwining with the ease of 40-plus years of practice. "You brought something I did not know I was missing. Before you, I thought I had everything I needed. The mountain, my solitude, my freedom. But you showed me that there is a kind of freedom that only comes from sharing your life with someone who truly sees you." "We are lucky," Delilah said quietly. "So many people go their entire lives without finding what we have." "We are lucky," Flynn agreed. "But we also fought for it. We chose each other every day, even when it was hard. That matters." It was true. Their marriage had not always been easy. There had been difficult winters when food ran short and tempers ran shorter. There had been times when Flynn's need for solitude clashed with Delilah's desire for community. There had been the terrible year when they lost a baby between Samuel and what would have been their fourth child, a grief that had nearly broken them both. There had been arguments and misunderstandings in moments when they had hurt each other without meaning to, but through it all, they had chosen to stay, to work through the problems, to remember why they had fallen in love in the first place. They had learned that love was not just a feeling, but a decision, made fresh every morning and honored through actions large and small. As the stars began to emerge in the darkening sky, their grandchildren came bursting out of the house, freshly bathed and ready for the bedtime story their grandparents always told when they visited. "Grandma, Grandpa, tell us about the wolves," little Emma, James's youngest daughter, pleaded. "No, tell us about the raiders," countered Michael, one of Lily Rose's boys. Flynn and Delilah exchanged amused glances. They had told this story hundreds of times, but it never got old. They settled the children around them on the porch, some sitting on the steps, others curled up on laps, and began the tale once more. Delilah started, as she always did. "It was September of 1881, and I was traveling from Denver to Cripple Creek to start my new life as a teacher." Flynn picked up the narrative when it came time to describe the raiders and the terror of being stranded in the darkness. The children leaned forward, captivated, even though they knew how the story ended. When Flynn got to the part about the wolves, he made the howling sound that always made the youngest children shiver and press closer to their parents. And when he described stepping onto that road to face down the pack, he stood up and acted it out, his still imposing frame casting a long shadow in the lamplight. "And then what happened, Grandpa?" Emma asked breathlessly, as if she did not already know. "Then I saw your grandmother," Flynn said, his voice softening as he looked at Delilah. "Standing there in the darkness, trying to be brave even though she was terrified. And I knew in that moment that my life was about to change." "Was it love at first sight?" one of the older grandchildren asked, a romantic teenager who was just beginning to understand such things. Flynn and Delilah looked at each other, and something passed between them, a communication that needed no words. "Not exactly," Delilah said. "I think it was recognition. Like some part of me knew that this man, this stranger, was going to be important, that he was going to change everything. And I felt the same, Flynn added. I did not know it was love yet. That came later, when I got to know her, when I saw how brave and smart and kind she was. But that first moment, there was definitely something. A spark. They finished the story as they always did, with their wedding and the birth of their children, with the building of their home and the growth of their family. And when the children were finally shepherded off to bed, yawning and happy, Flynn and Delilah remained on the porch. Do you think they will remember these nights? Delilah asked. When we are gone and they are old? I hope so. I hope they remember that their grandparents loved each other truly and completely, that we built something worth building and lived a life worth living. They will remember, Delilah said with certainty, because we are not just giving them stories, we are giving them an example. We are showing them what is possible when two people commit to each other fully. Flynn pulled her close, and they sat in comfortable silence as the night deepened around them. Inside the house, they could hear the sounds of their family settling in for sleep, quiet voices, footsteps, the creak of floorboards. These were the sounds of home, of love, of legacy. You know, Flynn said after a while, I used to think the best thing about my life was the freedom I found in these mountains, the ability to live on my own terms, away from society's expectations and judgments. And now? Now I know the best thing about my life is you. Is this. He gestured to encompass the house, the family inside, the life they had built. The freedom to live on my own terms only mattered because I got to choose you every single day. Delilah felt tears prick her eyes, as she still did after all these years when Flynn said something particularly moving. I feel the same way. I came west looking for independence, for a chance to be myself, and I found that. But I also found you, and that made everything else sweeter. They stayed on the porch until the cold drove them inside. The house was quiet now, everyone asleep, but it thrummed with life and love. Flynn banked the fire, while Delilah locked the doors, and then they climbed the stairs to their bedroom, moving slowly but together. As they lay in bed that night, Delilah's head resting on Flynn's chest as it had for more than 40 years, she thought about all the moments that had led to this one. The decision to leave Boston, the stagecoach journey, the raiders, the darkness, Flynn appearing like an answer to a prayer she had not known how to voice. Every choice, every chance encounter, every terrifying moment had been necessary to bring her here, to this life, to this man. And she would not change any of it, not a single moment, because it had all been part of the journey that led her home. Flynn, she whispered. His voice was drowsy, his hand running soothingly through her hair. Thank you for being my light. She felt his chest rumble with a quiet laugh. Thank you for letting me. They fell asleep like that, wrapped in each other's arms, two people who had found their way through the darkness and into the light, two people who had proven that love was real and lasting and worth every sacrifice, two people who had built a legacy that would outlive them both. Outside, the mountains stood silent and eternal under a blanket of stars. The wind whispered through the pines, carrying stories of all the lives that had intersected with these peaks, all the dramas and romances and tragedies that had played out in their shadow. And somewhere in those mountains, perhaps another lost soul was finding their way through the darkness, guided by lights both literal and metaphorical. The story of Delilah Harper and Flynn Kincaid was complete. They had lived fully and loved deeply, had raised children and built a home, had weathered every storm together. They had taken a moment of darkness and terror and transformed it into something beautiful and enduring. And in the end, that was all anyone could hope for. To find someone who would be their light in the darkness, their rock in the storm, their home when everything else fell away. Delilah and Flynn had found that in each other, and they had held on to it with everything they had, never taking it for granted, always choosing love. Their grandchildren and great-grandchildren would carry their story forward, sharing it with their own children someday. The tale of the raiders who took the stagecoach's only lantern and the mountain man who became his lady's light through the dark woods would become part of the family's history, a reminder of where they came from and what was possible when two people dared to reach for happiness. But for now, in this moment, in this house full of love and life, two old souls rested peacefully, content in the knowledge that they had done well, that their life together had mattered, that their love had been real and true and lasting. And that was the happiest ending of all.